Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Garden Wall Perspectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 5 and 6 of Over the Garden Wall, Mad Love and Lullaby in Frogland. Now, when we last left our valiant heroes, they were stopping at a tavern to ask for directions, as they had gotten lost on the way to Adelaide's. However, while they were stopping at said tavern, they wound up talking with the regulars of the tavern and heard more about the beast, how it lured souls into its forest, how when you lose hope, it would set upon you, take your soul, and would turn you into an edelwood tree, with the wood of said trees lighting the lantern it carries. The boy Wirt remembered that the woodsman carried the lantern, and to almost confirm that something is going on, they end up hearing Beatrice call for help, as she was not allowed in the tavern because she was a bluebird, and so the boys rush out to the woods to find her, and she seems to have been attacked by the woodsman. The boys start to believe that the woodsman really is an enemy, and that he's there to ultimately just steal their souls, and they manage to get Beatrice and escape, though as they escape, they end up learning that Beatrice was never really in any danger. She just saw a weird shape in the woods and wound up flying into a tree, so ultimately she was fine. However, the woodsman is revealed to have in fact been related to the beast after all. As it turns out, the lantern he carries is the beast's, he just stole it away from him, and the reason why he keeps it lit is because it's supposed to contain the soul of the woodsman's daughter. As such, unfortunately, while the woodsman is kind of reluctant, he is unfortunately part of the beast's whole plight, as the beast, as in order to keep the lantern lit, he still has to light it with the oil from edelwood tree bark. So unfortunately, he has to continue letting the beast do his own thing, and the beast is still hunting after the boys. However, the boys do actually get some good hope in there, as while they're at the tavern, in order to go save Beatrice, they stole a horse, who it turns out is a talking horse named Fred, who actually has directions to Adelaide's. And so the episode ended with them riding off into the distance to find Adelaide. And that's where this episode picks up, as Mad Love actually opens with the boys at a mansion. It turns out that they stopped by a mansion of an old eccentric billionaire who runs a tea industry. And he is pretty much so vastly wealthy that his mansion is bigger, more extravagant, almost labyrinthine, and he's exceedingly lonely. Yeah, they make it clear from the very first scene with this guy that he's not all there. His loneliness has kind of driven him a little cuckoo. Not completely straitjacket insane, but enough that he's clearly not right in the head, so to speak. And unfortunately, Beatrice is kind of taking advantage of that, as once the boys arrive there, she tells the old man that Wirt and Greg are his nephews who have come to visit. And while Wirt is against such deceptions, unfortunately, Beatrice says they kind of need some money, because in order to get to Adelaide's, they need to take a ferry, and the ferry ride is 2 cents. And since the boys don't actually have money on them, well, she thinks they may as well just take some from this guy, which Wirt, while reluctant, does ultimately agree with, because it's 2 cents. He probably has some loose change lying around somewhere, though Fred the horse is very much adamant on stealing as many things as he can. It's actually kind of funny. But as the boys continue talking with this old man, whose name I do not remember, they even said it in the episode, and I do not remember it. I'll probably remember it once the vlog is over, but the old man ends up mentioning that there's something off about the mansion, and that ultimately, put simply, he thinks it's haunted. And his basis for this is that one day while he was wandering the mansion, he happened to wander into a room that he didn't recognize. However, when he looked into the room, he found a portrait of a woman who he thought was just beautiful. He fell in love immediately, but upon seeing the portrait, he thought he felt someone was watching him, saw someone pass by. And as a result, he wound up leaving, but even after he ran away, he was smitten. The only problem is, he thinks he's smitten with a ghost, as he genuinely believes that the woman whose portrait he saw was the spirit who was stalking him that night. Greg hears this and thinks, holy shit, there's a ghost, I want to see it, so he immediately wants the old man to take him to where he saw the ghost, with Fred going along to essentially act as a distraction, because Beatrice still wants to search this old guy's place for 2 cents. As such, the group's pretty much split off, with Greg and Fred going with the old man, while Wirt and Beatrice end up looking through the mansion for pretty much any loose change they can find, trashing a lot of the guy's priceless artifacts in the process. However, as they're searching, they end up getting locked in a wardrobe because they heard tapping on a window and thought someone was coming back. It ultimately turned out to be a peacock, but they didn't know that. But unfortunately, upon going into the wardrobe, Beatrice and Wirt are kind of stuck, as the door is now jammed, and unfortunately, they really have nowhere else to go. Eventually, though, they do manage to find a loose trapdoor, which they are able to sneak through. But as they're searching through, Beatrice and Wirt end up just kind of talking, and while they're in the wardrobe, they looked in the clothes, and Beatrice mentioned, "Oh, why don't you look inside the why don't you look in the clothes? Sometimes people sew in coins into these things." And Wirt's like, I've never heard anyone do that before. And then Beatrice says, "I used to do that with my clothes." And he's like, "Wait, you used to wear clothes?" And he's like, "What, wearing a little bird shirt?" And no, I was human once. At which point, Wirt kind of wants clarification on that. And while Beatrice tries to dance around the subject, even trying to change it as they end up going through the secret passageways, eventually Wirt manages to get Beatrice talking. It turns out, yeah, she was human once upon a time. However, the reason why she's a bluebird now is because she insulted a bluebird, or more specifically, she threw a rock at one. As a result, the bluebird cursed Beatrice and her entire family and turned them into birds. And when Wirt hears this, he's like, "Wait, is that why you want to see Adelaide?" And Beatrice admits, yeah, that's why she wants to see Adelaide, as Adelaide is supposed to have the means to be able to transform her and her family back into humans. But unfortunately, well, it requires getting there first, and Beatrice admits that she will never go back to her family till she can turn them back. And in her own words, she's willing to do anything to do it. As such, Wirt to try and offset things, does admit a secret of his own about how he does, as it turns out, he actually did like a girl, which he mentioned in the first episode, but I glossed over because he said it as he was waxing poetic, so to speak. But yeah, he says he likes a girl, and that apparently he likes to recite poetry to himself when no one's around, and he plays the clarinet. But ultimately, Beatrice says that that's nothing to really be worried about, that's just character stuff. But as they work through the secret passageways, Wirt and Beatrice find themselves in another area of the mansion that doesn't seem to fit with the others, as I don't know the exact terminology he uses. I'm guessing you have to be a history buff in order to get this. But essentially, the area of the mansion that they're in seems to operate from a different era than the one that the old man's mansion was in. It was like French Rococo, Elizabethan, I think. Like, one side was French Rococo, the other is Elizabethan. Bottom line, this does not match with the architectural likes that the old man had. So Wirt begins wondering what the heck's going on, and he starts putting two and two together. In the meantime, as they're going through all this journey, Greg, the old man, and the horse are still wandering through the mansion, as the old man mentions that he's afraid that maybe there really isn't a spirit, that maybe he's just gone stark raving mad, and that he belongs in the loony bin. Greg ultimately just kind of is brushing it off because he says, "No, I think you're sane, mostly because I want to see a ghost." So they keep pushing forward, even going through this garden where he grows his finest tea leaves, until they manage to reach the section of the mansion that the old man saw the ghost in. And it's a bedroom in the same style that room that Wirt and Beatrice wound up in. And yep, sure enough, there's the portrait. However, as they're examining the portrait, first Greg thinks that the old man wound up killed the lady in the portrait, and then just walked around claiming this place was his. But as the accusations begin flying, suddenly they hear someone walk in, and when they look to the doorway, they see the woman from the portrait. And upon the old man and the woman seeing each other, they both faint. As both end up waking up, with Wirt and Beatrice meeting back up with the group, it turns both the old man and the woman reveal that they both lay claim to the mansion, as both of them have as it turns out they both have thought that the other was haunting them, and it turns out they're both kind of right. It turns out they're actually rival business partners. They're actually rival business owners, as she owns her own tea company, and she actually grows her tea leaves in the same garden as the old man. And it turns out, it turns out that they got so rich that their mansion just kept building and building until they wound up accidentally building into each other. And because they were so lonely, and the labyrinthine designs of both their mansions kind of made them a little loosey-goosey, they never noticed. As such, once both of them realize that they're not being haunted, and that the love of their lives are their business rivals, they just start making out. or at least they kiss and they become a couple. As such, the episode ends with the old man and the woman sending Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice off, and as a thanks for clearing up the haunting and introducing them to each other, they get both the old man and the woman give Greg 2 cents, which is exactly what they need to go across to get on the ferry. Telling him, "You've got some good sense there." And as such, Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice leave, with Fred staying behind to essentially be a workhorse for the couple. And Wirt thinks this is all good. We got what we need. We can just go on forward. Only for Greg to throw the 2 cents into a fountain, which even Wirt calls him out on. But at that point, it's too late. With Greg claiming he's like, "No, he was wrong. I got no sense," which makes me think that Greg was just disappointed that he didn't actually see a ghost. So, yeah, dumb kid. But that also leads us into Lullaby and Frogland. Despite the fact that they don't have the fee to pay the ferry, the group ends up sneaking onto the ferry anyway, and it turns out almost all of the passengers, are frogs in Victorian-era clothes or something like that. Essentially, they all look like the rich type of people that you would see in an older Americana story. And pretty much it just looks like things are finally going the way the group wants. Although as they travel along in the ferry, Beatrice seems to be a little hesitant, despite the fact that Wirt and Greg are excited that they're finally seeing Adelaide, with Wirt finally singing along with Greg to his Adelaide song. Well, Beatrice doesn't seem very thrilled and actually seems a lot more reserved. However, as they're celebrating this, the police end up coming on the ferry and end up zeroing in on the group because, well, like I said, they snuck on without paying. As such, they get a little chase scene, and while Wirt, Greg, Beatrice, and the frog, because that's something I forgot to mention, the frog is still with them, and for whatever reason on the ferry, it's actually walking around and moving like all the other anthropomorphic frogs. But they all manage to get into a closet, and Beatrice tries to convince Wirt that they should just turn themselves in and so forth. But they don't want to get arrested after they've come so far. As such, to try and throw the officers off, they end up getting into a group disguise, with Wirt balancing the frog on his head and having his cloak spread out over him, having the frog wear a hat like one of the band members, because there's a band on this ferry, and with Greg acting like his drum. However, in order to keep this up, they end up having to unfortunately go to the band's performance, and sadly, when Wirt prepares to drum Greg, unfortunately he ends up accidentally knocking out the bassoon player, which almost causes everyone on the boat to riot. However, Greg encourages Wirt to grab the bassoon and play it himself, with Wirt saying, "No, I can't do that. I can't play the bassoon. If anything, if I played it, they just throw us off even faster." This causes Beatrice to say, "Go ahead, do it. I believe in you." And so Wirt plays the bassoon, and he plays it well, and so everything seems to be going in order, even topped off by the frog now singing. Yeah, remember that frog in the first episode who sang the opening theme? Yeah, that's the frog that the boys have been traveling with. So, yeah, things are actually going well, going off without a hitch, no problems whatsoever. Though throughout all this, Beatrice seems disappointed. And as such, when the ferry does eventually reach its destination by the evening, they stop to rest at Beatrice's insistence, as she says, "Oh, we can't trouble Adelaide right now at this time of night. Let's go in the morning. Rest down here," with all the frogs on the ferry kind of burrowing in the mud for hibernation, and for some of them even offering Greg's frog a contract, and even giving him socks so that his little feet aren't cold, and so on and so forth. As such, Greg kind of goes through his own little arc where he wants to say goodbye to his frog. However, as the group hunkers down for the night, Wirt talks more about his lost love, so to speak, and how he actually was planning to talk to her, really talk to her, but he was still a little hesitant because, well, Greg was with him and he's embarrassed by him, and apparently some boy named Jason Funderburker came in and took her away from him. As such, Beatrice comments how back home Wirt was kind of a loser, but as long as he's been in the unknown, he's been actually really confident, really good, really full, actually coming to his own. So maybe he should consider staying, which Wirt does think about. As such, Beatrice says, "Okay, that's good. Then we don't have to go see Adelaide. Good night." And so everyone goes to sleep. However, once the fire goes out and it looks like that everybody's resting, Beatrice gets up and leaves. This ultimately ends up getting Wirt's attention, this ultimately causes Wirt to wake up, and he decides to get Greg, and they end up following Beatrice to her destination, which it turns out is Adelaide's house. And we finally do see Adelaide, and she does not look like the kindly woman of the pasture that Beatrice made her out to be, as she has pale skin, pulled back lips, looks like hollow, looks like she has bags under her eyes, or her eyes are strained back, and basically looks like that something's just off about her. As such, Beatrice ends up going into her house through the chimney, and it turns out that Adelaide Beatrice made a deal with Adelaide. It turns out that Adelaide, she was going to Adelaide for help, because Adelaide apparently has these pair of magic scissors that, if they're used to clip the wings of Beatrice and her family, it will return them back to their human forms. However, Adelaide refused to hand it over to Beatrice because she wanted a boy, a child, to be her servant. And so, if Beatrice could provide one, then she would hand over the scissors. And, well, that's where Wirt and Greg come in. However, with all the time that Beatrice has spent with them, she wants to go back on the deal, tries to renege, even tries talking Adelaide into just turning Beatrice back into a human so she can be her servant, which Adelaide almost goes for, except Wirt and Greg walk in and see the exchange. And the instant Adelaide sees them, she springs a trap, as throughout her home you saw all these ribbons and sewing cloth, just all these strings all about, and Adelaide pulls on one, and immediately all the strings just wrap around Greg and Wirt to tie them in place. As such, Adelaide talks about how she's going to make them her servants, fill their heads up with wool so they'll obey every command like sheep. And once Wirt realizes this, he quickly realizes that Beatrice is walking them into a trap. Though Beatrice does try to say, no, it's not like that. But at this point, it's really not. It's really a kind of a moot point, as Adelaide still talks about how she's doing what the voice commands. It talks to her and she obeys. She follows his word, blah, blah, blah. Pretty much it's clear that someone else is pulling the strings, but that doesn't really go for very long before Beatrice decides, you know what, screw you, and opens up a window. And earlier Adelaide said that the night air that she doesn't like the night air, it doesn't do well for her. But as such, Beatrice opens up the window and just blows it right in, which causes Adelaide to start freaking out, which causes her to drop the scissors. As she says that the night air is poison to her, and Beatrice just thinks, oh, whatever, get over it. And she does try to run to Wirt and Greg to help get them out of their binds, but it turns out Adelaide wasn't kidding, as the night air causes her to melt and turn into smoke. As such, Beatrice tries flying through the smoke to get to Greg and Wirt, but it turns out that, in the confusion, Wirt managed to grab the scissors and managed to cut himself and Greg free. And as such, in the confusion, they ran away, with Beatrice calling out to them, telling them, I'm sorry, it's not what it looked like, please come back, but at this point, it's too late. Wirt and Greg are long gone, and Beatrice is left by her lonesome. And when we check back in with Wirt and Greg, well, Wirt is not happy. He's very much angry, bitter, and regrets even trusting Beatrice at all. And while the mood does lighten a little with Greg's frog coming back, because apparently he's still loyal to them, Wirt is acting cold to Greg too, telling him they just need to keep going. And thus the episode ends on a melancholy note as they both wander further into the unknown, now even more lost than they were before. So, okay, first let's talk about Mad Love. I think that Mad Love is a nice episode. First off, it does well in offering some more character dynamics with once again setting up more interactions between between the boys, specifically Wirt, and Beatrice. And we once more look more into Beatrice's backstory. As it turns out, she really is more. It turns out she does have her own reasons for wanting to get to Adelaide, as well as what combined with the reveal in the next episode, offering hints at what Beatrice is really doing. As every time when Wirt does learn from her offhand comment that she was human once, hold on a sec. There we go. When Wirt learns from Beatrice's offhand comment that she was human once, she does seem to be avoiding the subject, but when Wirt does eventually get it out of her, she does sound distraught, and you can clearly hear how guilty she is for unfortunately having caused her current plight, as it not only affected her, but her family as well. And it offers a nice little, it shows another side to Beatrice, is what I'm saying. Because up to this point, Beatrice has just kind of been standoffish, kind of a jerk, a bit pushy, and kind of a scam artist. But ultimately, when you learn that there is a reason why she's being pushy, that she is trying to just desperately get to Adelaide, and it's not just her, that she's trying to fix a mistake that not only affected her, but her family, it kind of helps give another angle to her character. Showcases that she's not just the pushy jerk that we've seen before, that she actually does have things that she's fighting for, and as she puts it, she's willing to do anything to do it. But even then, you can see some hesitance in her words. Again, hold on 1 second, adjusting that. There we go. As when Wirt mentions, so your plan was to go see Adelaide and she could fix you, she says, it was the plan until, then she pauses and then like, yeah, that was the plan. And so you can tell at this point she's starting to have second thoughts. Because throughout these episodes, she has grown closer to these kids. Like, it's been a short time, but pretty much from the outset, Beatrice saw Wirt and Greg as patsies, so to speak. They just these two wandering lost boys who probably didn't know any better, somehow wandered into the unknown, and now she's taking advantage of their naivete to benefit her, because she's willing to do anything to undo her mistake, which unfortunately is kind of blinding her to basically the morality of her actions, because obviously her actions had dire consequences, and most likely the only thing going through her head is, I need to fix it. This lady has the means to fix it. I gotta trust her, even if she's nuts. Sorry, lunch. And so, of course, when she saw Wirt and Greg, she probably just was planning to write them off. But the more time she spent with them, and the more she saw they weren't patsies, the more she started to like them. At first, she saw Wirt as a pushover, but Wirt was able to stand up for himself and actually prove that he did have character and could stand on his own two legs without being told what to do. Then in the episode that immediately preceding it, Wirt and Greg came to her rescue when they thought that she needed help, and she realized. And on top of that, they actually did find directions on their own, which made her actually start to appreciate things. And then in this episode in Mad Love, they actually started talking. She learned more about them. She opened up to them more, which showcased that she started to trust them more. And with that kind of attachment comes doubt. And she begins realizing, I can't let these kids be sacrificed for my own sake. It actually is a very interesting angle for Beatrice's character, and while it does feel a little rushed, I'll get into that when I talk about my thoughts on the series as a whole, it does well in showcasing Beatrice's changing mindset. And so, I do like seeing that grow more with this episode. And on top of that, we also get some more stuff with Wirt, as he talks about how he did have a crush on a girl, and how he apparently recites poetry to himself, so that's not exactly a big thing. Also, we do learn a bit more character stuff about him, as he's able to recognize the differing styles between the old man's mansion and the woman's mansion, so yeah, there's that. But aside from character stuff, I think what makes the episode work is that it does feel kind of off-putting. It follows in a similar vein to other episodes in Over the Garden Wall. It feels odd and disturbing, yet beneath the surface is something else. And that's kind of what happens throughout the episode. From the minute you meet the old man in this episode, you're kind of off-put by him. He seems not all there, and he isn't all there. Like I said, he fell for the whole Wirt and Greg are his nephews thing and didn't once question it throughout the course of the whole episode. I think maybe one time he did when Fred accused him of murdering the rightful owner of the mansion and pretending to be him, and so he said, "You're after my money, aren't you?" But even then, he still called Greg his nephew in that scene, so he clearly still believed the lie even then. But as the episode goes along, they start throwing the possibility that he might just be not well. Because, as he mentioned, because of how labyrinthine his mansion is and how lonely he is, it just kind of leaves him alone with his thoughts, and unfortunately, he's just, as we've seen, not all there. He's not in his right mind, and he's sane enough to realize he's not in his right mind because he's starting to, because he's the one that throws in the possibility that maybe the spirit might not be real, and he's just gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So it is kind of interesting, and the way they build it up really does feel like there's something off going on, especially when you see the clashing styles of his and the woman's mansion. Because prior to her learning who she is, the idea could be that he might have actually murdered someone, and in his madness, he thought he was the rightful owner. But ultimately, when you learn that what's really going on is actually less crazy, it turns something that was off-putting to something that's actually pretty sweet. As it turns out, the lady that he thought was haunting him was just as infatuated with him, as he thought she was a beautiful ghost. She thought he was a dashing spirit. And the instant they learn who the other is and that they're actually business rivals, not haunting spirits, they actually immediately fall for each other. They both realize that they're not as mad as they think they are, and so as a result, it turns something that was for the most part very weird and off-putting to something genuinely sweet and kind. And by the end of the episode, when the old man and the lady got to get together and thank Wirt and Greg, it's nice. It's really nice, and it is nice that ultimately that honesty is what paid off, as the old man ultimately helped Wirt and as the old man repaid Wirt and Greg by giving them the 2 cents they needed. So it's really nice and sweet, and it does further along the whole things are not what they seem in the unknown theme that Over the Garden Wall likes. So kudos on that. But as for Lullaby and Frogland, this episode is a very bittersweet one. It starts out really nice and just kind of chipper and fun. It starts out just kind of, it kind of starts out, from the outset, it feels like it's going to be like Schooltown Follies. As you see Wirt and Greg on the ferry, it's a nice sunny day. All the passengers are frogs in Victorian dress, and the kids think they finally have a chance of going home. But throughout the episode, there's a sense of underlying unease. As you see Beatrice just finally starting to question everything, and ultimately trying to find ways to stop Wirt and Greg from getting to Adelaide, as she begins intentionally trying to sabotage them and get them caught. As she says, "Turn yourselves in, it'll be easier." Or when she tells Wirt to play the bassoon, thinking that he'll fail at it, only to be good. And even when she tries to say, maybe we shouldn't go see Adelaide tonight, or when she ultimately says, "Oh, you know what, let's just not go. Let's not go. How about you stay here? You're good here, right? Let's do that. Just stay." It's clear that she is Navi's, at this point, she's starting to realize, I can't get rid of these kids. I don't want anything bad to happen to them. So she begins having second thoughts. And so throughout the first half of the episode, as all these zany antics go on with the kids running away from the frogs, singing in the band, which everybody ultimately loves, to Greg's frog even getting a contract to sing, ultimately you just feel a sense of unease, that something is off. Ultimately things do get closer. Ultimately, Wirt does grow closer to Beatrice as he opens up to her more and more. But again, throughout it, things just feel off. Even through all the sweetness and nice and oddities that you're seeing, there's just something going on. And by the end of the episode, you finally see what it is. As the group finally reaches Adelaide, and we learn that she is not the kind lady of the glades that she was made out to be. She is a nutball, a witch, who ultimately, the only reason Beatrice is bringing the kids to her at all was because she made a deal with her. And as a result, everything kind of takes a downward spiral from there. As the boys end up or at least Wirt ends up losing trust with Beatrice, especially since he grew so close to her. And by the end, while Beatrice tries to make up for her mistake by taking out Adelaide, by that point it's too little too late. The boys have escaped without her. They've taken the scissors, because I'm guessing this is because that's how they managed to get free in the first place. And when Beatrice tries to yell out and just explain herself to them again, they're long gone. She's stuck, and ultimately she realized, I effed up and I can't make up for this. And as such, by the end of the episode, when you see Wirt and Greg wandering off into the mists of the unknown, it leaves kind of a sour taste in your mouth. Because you know that Beatrice regrets her actions and tried to make it up. But from their perspective, particularly Wirt's, she was someone that they grew to trust, who ultimately was lying to them and was trying to sell them into slavery. And you can just see the anger in Wirt's face as he's kicking himself for even trusting Beatrice, and any goodness that he had in any goodness he had in the episode, especially when he was celebrating with Greg earlier, is gone. It's tainted. And even when Greg gets his happy ending, when his frog comes back for him, Wirt is just cold to him, colder than he was even at the beginning of the series, as he just tells him, keep going. It's clear that it hurt him, and at this point now they really have nowhere else to go. They blew off the woodsman's directions because they thought he was possibly nuts, as well as learning he was potentially tied to the beast. The one person that they thought they could trust turns out to have been lying to them, and their only hope of getting home, the whole reason they got this far in the first place, ultimately turned out to be a witch who just wanted to use them. So yeah, it kind of makes sense why Wirt would probably be as angry as he is in the episode by the end. And while the episode is full of all these nice, fun antics and colorful imagery, that does actually feel nice and fits right in with a kid's show, especially, which I honestly admit there is some humor in them running away from the frog police. And at one point, even in the chase, as they're running, Greg stops to salute the captain and the police to end up stopping to do the same. Eventually, all of that kind of gets pushed aside in the second half when you finally learn the truth about Adelaide, and it's off-putting. It brings the whole thing it brings all good moods and good times that we had in this episode down to just a halt, and now replaces it with a kind of somber bitterness that ultimately any trust that was built up is gone, and all that's left is an angry child and two boys that now have nowhere to go. Even more, like I said, they're even more lost than before now. They don't have a guide. They don't know where the path is. They have nowhere they have nowhere they can turn to, and it's clear that things are just going to get worse before they get any better. So, it's very interesting in that regard, and it does well in just kind of creating a very sad tone. A great sense of mood with Blash in comparison to the first half of the episode, which again was nice, colorful, and fun, whereas the contrast the somber darkness and cold that the second half of the episode offers. So overall, I think both episodes are good. Mad Love does well in continuing character stuff with Wirt and Greg, while also offering a sense of unease and mystery with the old man before the reveal of who his ghost was. And Lullaby and Frogland does well in creating a nice, fun mood while perking things up before ultimately shattering any goodwill that was brought up when the boys learn that Adelaide was actually a witch, and ultimately while Beatrice tries to make up for it and save the boys, in the end the damage is done. The damage is done. Wirt doesn't trust her anymore. And now things are even worse off than they were before. So it does well in creating a mood and makes you wonder where things are going to go from here, if things can improve at all. So overall, still two good episodes. One nice and fun with a hint of unease and mystery. The other other nice and fun, but still ending on a very somber and bitter note that ultimately works. So yeah, overall, both of them are still good episodes, and I still look forward. And the journey is definitely going to get more twisty as things go on. So. That's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I hope to see you next week when we look at the next two episodes of Over the Garden Wall. But until then, hope you have a good night, and take care.